What? What do you want? Can a guy just grind stats in his basement room without being constantly bothered by a schedule of YouTube videos? Please? No, come on, man. I've been grinding out YouTube videos for like a week or so. I'm not famous yet, so like, it's gotta be it. Alright. Yeah, I guess we can talk about Rondale Moore. I already talked about him in my top tier video, but I think he's getting lost a little bit. I heard someone the other day saying Rondale Moore's starting to get hype, which probably means we haven't spoken about him enough, because there's just nothing to say other than, yep, there's one of the best prospects in this class by a none. There's not many places to go with that. Alright, I've been digging into team score and looking at the root statistics that I imagine is around something like teammate score. Just looking at the market share of receiving yards and receptions and touchdowns of teammates of successful prospects or on a team on average as a wide receiver 1 and 2, and also looking at the yards per team pass attempt. And I know I'm probably starting to listen to me grind, take down the film. Because I figured out I'm kind of like the nerd version of a tape grinder. That's, I think, where I fit in, right? I don't believe all these averages that don't have a lot of evidence behind them. The sample size is too small. That's basically, it's like saying you got to watch all the tape, you know? Because I believe in looking at the stats instead of asking it to pull up a number and then minus another number, and there you go, that's the best player. I'm like, well, College Dominator is a great example of this. I did a video on that forever ago, before I even thought YouTube was something I would try and do regularly. What is College Dominator? And one of the big problems is sometimes it's made different. Sometimes you're averaging the same year twice because you're using the best and last year, but sometimes the best year is also their last year. So you're just double counting a really good year. So you can defeat that just by looking. Just look at the progression of their career. You know, you can avoid players like that and players with similar Julio Jones-like college dominators that don't deserve them, because they're not made the same way. So yeah, I think I'm a tape grinder of stats. So what am I getting at here? Let's use Alabama. It's in the video. So I pre-planned that whenever I was going to talk about this. I've been talking about team and Alabama a lot. I was literally trying to wrap my head around someone's comment the other day talking about how players in Alabama will be wide receiver 1s elsewhere. And I'm like, I'm trying to prove who is a wide receiver 1. So how do I start off with that assumption? And I can't get my head around it. Like, I want to know if they're good, not they are good, therefore let's see. You know? It doesn't work that way around. So Alabama and Calvin Ridley. Everyone keeps telling me that, you know, you'd miss out on Calvin Ridley. I'm like, I didn't miss out on Calvin Ridley. What are you talking about? I went and looked, and he was dominant from the moment he stepped on the field. Like the stats that Jalen Waddle doesn't have, Calvin Ridley does. And so does Julio, and so does Amari Cooper. Like, those are the three that have them from Alabama, and those are the three that have hit. Jerry Jeudy was pretty close, and I accepted, after digging into Henry Ruggs a little bit, I found some positive there, and there was a bit more of a squish, so okay, Jerry Jeudy's good too. Top 24 wide receiver in his rookie year, so that's working out. Henry Ruggs not. It seems to fit, and yet it does make sense. Same with conference. Before I started digging into that a lot this offseason, it makes sense conference matters. It just doesn't matter if you apply a broad brush with it. Now, I know I'm getting boring talking about this stuff, so I've got Travis May on the hook. Or at least he says he's on the hook. He's got to finish all his work, but he's promised to come on either a live stream or a podcast with me and explain to me why I'm stupid, what I'm getting wrong. He's like king adjuster, frankly. He's got an adjusted production index, so he should be able to fix me and explain to me exactly all the things I'm getting wrong. And I'm looking forward to it, because, God, I want to put this behind me. So why Calvin Ridley? Why am I talking about Calvin Ridley? When he was 20 years old, he walked onto the Alabama squad and took the wide receiver 1 job away. Literally, he was the highest scoring wide receiver in his first year at age 20. The reason he stepped on the team a little later had a lot more to do with his high school team and declaring ages and when he could go to college than anything else. It wasn't like he was in remedial school or like he just didn't feel like playing till he was 20 years old. Now, I've been calling it the Calvin Ridley rule for a while now, but it could very easily be called the AJ Green rule, because he did it a long time before Calvin Ridley, which is if you're looking at age-adjusted production, you can't knock a player for not playing at an earlier age. In the same way, you can't knock a player for 2020 because he didn't play enough games because he opted out or anything else. If they don't play enough to judge, you can't judge. But if they do, then you can look and compare them to past players playing at a similar age. That's another reason adjusting by age actually has a benefit. So Calvin Ridley stepped on with like a 31% dominator at age 20. Now, even for a first year, that's great. But if you judge it by first, second, third year, or freshman, sophomore, I find it to be worthless. I like age. So even at 20 years old, that dominator of a 31% share of the team's receiving offense basically is above the age curve. It was by far his best year, and it was his first year. And because I noticed that. I didn't have to just look at the average. I realized that he was punching above that ceiling weight like straight away, and that's pretty impressive. His next 2 years are actually a little less impressive. They're above the age curve, but they dropped down to like a 27 and a 22% dominator. There's a little bit of degression instead of progression, which I've mentioned before. I kind of like to see progression. But once a player is so far over the average, it's kind of hard to expect a progression, but you do kind of wonder what happened. Well, what happened with Calvin Ridley, as some of this video is showing, is that Darius Stewart. Let me ask you a question. People who think Alabama make a difference. Is Darius Stewart better than Calvin Ridley? Then sit down. Seriously, sit down. And stop telling me my stats aren't my stats, because they are. That's it. That's the argument. Go look. Go look. And then we'll talk again, okay? Darius Stewart took over the job again as the highest dominator rating in Calvin Ridley's second year. It was Darius Stewart's last year on the team. And that's why I talk about senior difference. He was the biggest part of the offense, according to Dominator, in that year. But he was also a senior. He'd been there on the team the year before, at least, if memory serves, and gotten like a 1.9% dominator, or whatever. There's really no reason Darius Stewart should have blown up that year, other than it pretty much was his last year on the team. And obviously he was a skilled college player, if not a skilled NFL level player. Although, to be fair, we never seen him get a fair shot, so I can't even say that conclusively. Either way, Calvin Ridley with the second dominator rating and 2 team adjustment. That's relatively high. That's exceptionally high, even for wide receiver 2 on Alabama. Because good players tend to stand out, not get held down because of the team. In fact, not having a higher dominator rating on Alabama, I think, is probably a more negative thing than a positive thing for the team adjustment crowd. That's not what I think, that's what I seem to find when I look. But, you know, I'm a tape grinding nerd, so whatever. So, interesting enough, that year when Darius Stewart had the highest dominator rating, Calvin Ridley was still the highest scoring wide receiver. He had more PPR points. So it was never a year Calvin Ridley stepped into Alabama's team. All 3 years, he was the highest scoring wide receiver on that team, whether he played more, less, or the same games as anyone else. So he was always the wide receiver 1 there, despite what dominator rating says. But, you know, that would require going and looking. So you probably don't care about that. Fictional character number 2. Anyway, what happened after Darius Stewart left? Ridley was the dominant wide receiver 1, but again, there was a slight degression instead of progression, which was weird if you think other players on the team are the only reasons that players get held down or don't break thresholds. So Calvin Ridley's profile was very good. There was some problems there, especially with the digression and the fact he hadn't played before 20, but you don't knock him for that. It's just you kind of wish you'd seen what he'd done before he was a little more physically developed, but he'd impressed, especially in that first year. I liked DJ Moore because I knew a little bit more about him. I think that was literally my line. I got to see him play at those important ages, and so that lent me towards DJ Moore a little bit. And so far, it's looking like DJ Moore is definitely the best early bet, but I think that, you're good either way, frankly. And Calvin Ridley has shown a higher ceiling so far, I think, at least in terms of actual production. So it might turn out that Calvin Ridley was the better of the two, but I could be a little bit more sure of DJ Moore, and I was never out on Calvin Ridley, as much fun as it was to tease Jake Anderson about it. So, yeah, he did what most wide receivers do, even on Alabama, with Darius Stewart, who I do remember some buzz about, because Alabama, blow-up player in his last year. Sounds familiar, but anyway. And Alabama, it must be better than everyone else, when in fact it's a little more worrying he wasn't actually more productive than most players, like Calvin Ridley had proven he could be. But anyway, so why am I telling you the Calvin Ridley story? It's just another illustration of how I found the way a player career plays out, and how these players are incomparable. I mean, I get told that, and it's accurate all the time. You can't compare market share to market share on different teams and different situations with different coaches and different quarterbacks and different success levels. And Darius Stewart getting less points because he was getting long ball targets with a high market share of yards, similar market share of touchdowns, and the reason Calvin Ridley went out is because he was getting more market share of receptions. It's literally PPR points. The catches that he got made him the wide receiver one, by the way, going back to that second year. That's all true. But that's not what I'm doing. I'm actually trying to look and understand the way their production flowed throughout their career, looking for indications, not proof, not no, if you get a certain stat, you clearly have a skill set that will dominate in the NFL. I'm looking for indications that are very common in wide receivers that do dominate in the NFL. Like, the only thing they really share in common in a close range, without having to talk about, BMI, which literally should just be thrown out the window, by the way. This is the stuff they have in common, that they produce over a certain threshold across certain stats, and if you can read their production, you can even avoid some outliers that get double counted with college dominator, or get over counted because last year difference because they're seniors. That's it. That's why I'm re-highlighting the Calvin Ridley story. Moving on to Rondale Moore. So what does Rondale Moore do? Rondale Moore is from Purdue. And the reason I like talking about Rondale Moore, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Rondale Moore. Rondale Moore. Realize I said his name a lot, because it's probably the only one I'm going to get right in this class, so I better keep saying it. No, it's because he played for Purdue, right? And back when I first started making contact, all those eons of 3 years ago, I was pretty interested, my first year, really having some followers and having a little bit of a place to put articles instead of trying to find somewhere that would actually read them, let alone publish them. D'Angelo Yancey, I remember writing D'Angelo Yancey up for RotoViz because they were running an annual competition of write a good article and we'll publish it. I've yet to be published by RotoViz, by the way, so I guess they didn't like it. But I was a pretty big fan. Now, I've since progressed in the progress and learned to look at the stats and got a familiarity with them better, and I can see some problems. But D'Angelo Yancey was the last player who had any signs of being significantly good that indicated he might have traits that would potentially lead to point scoring or an elevated level of point scoring in the NFL. And honestly, I can't even remember if he was drafted, but he definitely went to the Packers depth chart. And I was really hopeful. Even at one point, like, this is my famous story, the brush with fame that I have once. D'Angelo Yancey's publicist or agent, or someone to do with his agent, asked me to correct that I had his height and weight listed incorrectly in the article that had actually gotten published somewhere else because RotoViz didn't want anything to do with it. And that's my brush with fame right there. Other than Matthew Berry following me. Like, that's it. So where was I? Yeah. D'Angelo Yancey was the last player on this team to show any kind of significant market share or yards per team pass attempt that kind of made him similar to prospects that hit in the NFL. It hasn't worked out, but I was rooting for him. I was rooting for him as a dark horse for that Packers wide receiver 2 job even back when. But moving on. I'm pointing that out.
Listen to me grind. Take down the film.
Team adjustment. The last player who had anything like the stats I'm going to talk about was D'Angelo Lansey. Now, the thing you should take away from that is, just because it's Purdue does not mean that players produce in a way that reflects or compares well to players that have dominated in the NFL. The team has done its job at keeping players well below that threshold that since D'Angelo Lansey, literally Danny Anthrop, Cameron Posey, who else could we pull up here from Purdue? Bilal Marshall. Like, none of these guys have come close to, hey, look, that may be a dark horse. And Yancey's profile had some problems. It never really crested 30%, for example. He dropped below to the wide receiver 2 at an insignificant dominator rating after being the wide receiver 1, but only with a 17% dominator at age 18. So it wasn't an impressive, but it was impressive that it was 18, and for Purdue it was pretty high. So it was interesting. So there were some problems there, but that was the last guy that showed any level of dominance that compares well to players that dominate in the NFL. Rondale Moore, we finally get to him once we move down to, when did he start? What year did he actually start playing? I don't know, because it's the only one highlighting deep dark green for Purdue. Yeah, in 2018 he has his first season. Now, D'Angelo Lansey, as you might remember from a few seconds ago, I said I was pretty interested that at age 18 he became the wide receiver 1 with a 17% dominator rating. That's a really low dominator rating for a wide receiver 1, by the way, for any team, even Purdue, and even for that conference. And that was one of the weird things on Yancey's profile. So, what did Moore do? 30? We're already nearly doubling it. It was 37%, right? Yeah, he had a 37% dominator. So 17 was interesting at age 18. In Purdue. Rondale Moore had 37% dominator rating in 2018, long before we have to worry about COVID, and also a reason why I don't have to tilt a lot over last year. We can just throw it out. Apart from players that only broke out late or have high shares, that's where players that analysts that lean a lot on that last year, or too much on the average without looking at the stats or trying to read the way their career Juice might have some concerns, but I really don't do that. So honestly, I don't care. I also don't have to care too much that he never really crossed a statistical relevant threshold of number of games played because of injuries after that. I do have to worry about the mystery of injuries and if he's injury prone and yada yada yada. But since I can't predict injuries and not a doctor, I basically just get to say, meh. I don't know. So it just becomes a random variable of all NFL players, or at least that's the way I take it. All NFL players can get injured at any time for any length of time. It's a pretty violent sport, so it just kind of fades into the background for me. Outside of that, Rondale Moore has literally the best season of any prospect over the last, I would go as far as 2 draft classes, and the best single season based on age-adjusted production. And that's an adjustment I do believe in, because when you look at age-adjusted production, players who are better do better in it, instead of just, obviously, team adjustments make sense. I can't wait for Travis May to own me on that, by the way. I'm getting way too cocky about it. He needs to take me down a peg or two. I'm looking forward to it. Because, like everything else, there's got to be a there, and I just don't know what it is yet. And until I find it, I'm just gonna meme over it. Like that's the way that goes. That's the way I go. Anyway, so despite having only one season we can really judge him in, it really doesn't matter for Rondale Moore. Now, I have dropped him down in my ranks a little bit, and I'm really thinking about stopping that, because that's honestly just because I'm trying to be fair and balanced. And when I think about that, I'm like, when did I start caring about being fair and balanced? For you all or for me? Like, I want to get on my horse and ride, you know? Like, if you don't know that you should just ignore me if you disagree, because that's the way I would advise, and I think anyone giving you decent advice would advise you to do, because that's where the fun is. In all instances, getting it right or wrong, the fun is making up your own mind. Then, I don't know, that feels like a you problem. But for right now, I've got him a little further down in my ranks to pay respect to the fact that I don't know if it continues. That it could be an Amon-Ra, who had about half as good a season at age 18, and then we saw mostly a digression. Like Calvin Ridley, but Calvin Ridley's year was significantly above the age threshold at an older age, but also significantly above it by not as much as Rondale Moore was at age 18, but much more that much further above it than Amon-Ra was at 18, so they're not really comparable. But if you see a career play out, you know more about that player. And so to stay fair in my process, I've dropped him down a peg or two. There's a little bit of a less that I know. I can't be as sure that Rondale Moore is the best prospect we've seen over the last few classes as I was saying about G.J. Moore and Calvin Ridley. I know Calvin Ridley's good, but I can be a little less sure on it because I didn't see him play those early years. It's the same in reverse for Rondale Moore. Having said that, he is my clear draft crush in terms of the wide receiver position because I love age-adjusted production, and he has the best year at age 18 compared to anyone else's at any age. So, that's the best you can really do. This is a Juju level crush here on his first year, alright? Just to be clear on this. Now, one thing I would say is, while I'm digging into team adjustments, Purdue seems to have done this twice now in this same era. Now, this might just be a case of two good players turning up in a relatively quick succession. Like I said, since DeAngelo Lancey, no one's really had this large a share of the offense. No one's really had this higher marks in yards per team pass attempt, just by confidence, by team, by age, whatever. No one's really close. DeAngelo Lancey was as good a prospect as Rondale Moore is, just based on that one single year, and that's even when looking at the average, removing those other 2 years, so he gets pulled down of what his full year could give him. Like, I'm docking him for those 2 missed years, right? Well, not docking him, he just doesn't get the chance to consistently prove it, and the scores come down slightly. Which is why in my pre-draft model, if you notice, he doesn't just sit at the top. That's also one of the reasons I argue with my model a lot. But anyway, so the problem, if I could find a problem, isn't the 2 missing years. It's that David Bell, I happen to have a date of birth for him, and I don't always for prospects in the future, but someone's already put him on the Devy age list at DLF, apparently, because when I imported the ages, his age has popped up. Now, I would point out that date of births are awfully fluid till we get to the draft, pretty much, or the combine, if it happens next year. Who knows? I want to go places. I really want to go places. I hope they get to go places next year, too. Anyway, David Bell in 2019 was 18 years old, according to the date of birth I have for him right now, and he had a 26% dominator rating in that first year. That's better than Yancey had, not as good as Rondale Moore. Just for a quick reference, is it good? Yeah, that's actually really good. If that date of birth holds up, depending on the way his career flows from here, that's actually pretty interesting. The other thing about that's one of the years Rondale Moore only played less than 6 games, so, good. We can't even talk about, him pushing Rondale Moore down. Rondale Moore just wasn't playing. But in that opportunity, much in the way that DK Metcalf and AJ Brown were switching out being the wide receiver one because one was available than the other one was, they're kind of independent of each other, and yet they both managed to break out at age 18, significantly high, not just for the team, but for the conference and looking at all conferences. That's what age adjustment production means. He's also done pretty well in 2020. Now, bear in mind that the whole team played less than 6 games in 2020 because of the mess that was. And so this is why I'm a little more concerned with the 2022 draft prospects rather than the 2021, because that's going to fall into the year range that I'm most interested in. It's going to be the first or the second year when I'm looking at 2022 prospects, and I kind of want to see those years a little bit more than I want to see the last year. But anyway, last year, in a weird year, Rondale Moore played 3 games, David Bell played 6 games, and David Bell had a 43% dominator at age 19. Now, that's 19, not 18, but because I'm not just using 18 is better than 19. 43% dominator rating, even in a 6-game season, is a freaking high dominator rating. That would be the new best season adjusted by age I have seen in recent years. If that holds up, and if we don't just want to put a big old asterisk on there for the 2020 season. So, I'm not trying to evaluate David Bell right now. I'm going to leave this headache for another year. Next year, this is what I'm going to be stressing out, I guess. But what is interesting, or a potential problem, if you want to talk about team, is that, or team adjustments, is that since DeAngelo Lancey, no one's even come close to dominating on Purdue. Not being the best wide receiver in the conference. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about players elbowing out such a large role for themselves, which is what I think is an indicator of a high level of talent that could translate well to the NFL. And again, it's something that NFL level dominant players seem to have in common, and is just about the only thing they consistently have in common across the board or across much larger of a sample size. For example, BMI, height, 40 time, a smaller percentage of those players fall into a bucket that you would consider reasonable as having certain breakout thresholds or certain yards per team pass attempt thresholds passed. That they have it more in common more often than anything else you care to name. So, Purdue's done this with two players specifically over the last 3 years, having never done it before, ever. DeAndre Lancey was the closest I ever remember on Purdue doing. So is this a feature of the team, and is David Bell's 43%, even if we throw that out, his 2019 dominator when, again, Rondale Moore was injured and only played 4 seasons, was 26% age 18. It's unusual that happens. It's really unusual that Purdue sees it. It's really unusual that two players back-to-back on a team that typically has not been able to draft or scout or find high-level dominating skilled players have them back-to-back. Now, that's just kind of conspiracy theory waving, and it's a narrative, but it's as close as I can get to a concern with Rondale Moore that maybe the market share has ramped up in the recent era of Purdue because of the nature of the way they're playing the games, I guess, maybe. Now, again, that's a fictional concern because players don't dominate just because of what teams do, right? We see it with New England. New England in the NFL, dominant team forever, but Julian Edelman, Wes Welker, these were definitely good players. Like, they were definitely good players. But they also played wide receiver and running back and quarterback instead of wide receiver in college, and so we can't really compare that situation to what they did in college, for example. But I do know, and we can come up with examples where dominant teams don't necessarily have ultra-dominant wide receivers. So I do think that operates a little bit independently. So that's another reason I'm a little uncertain or unaware of why team adjustments would be so important that we should give, I don't know, a Jalen Waddle 20% bump for no particular reason other than his name's Jalen Waddle, I guess. Yeah, that's as close as I can get. Honestly, I just think David Bell might be pretty good as well. That's my answer. And, listen to me grind. Take down the film. And I start out from a point, which is, I'm probably getting something wrong. Let's make sure we pay attention to what other people say and find the parts that we can use or make sense to us, or some way of stopping myself failing extra, right? But this process told me to avoid Henry Ruggs, like Jerry Jeudy, and Mari Cooper, Julio Jones, and no one else from Alabama, and that worked. So, yeah, I'm probably just going to end up bending this around to David Bell, also probably just pretty good. And if the NFL gives Rondale more draft capital, there's very little holding him back from being the best wide receiver in this class. I'm just saying it. I'm just calling it. So anyway, I just thought me talking around about how I form my opinion on this stuff would help. That's what I've been doing in these prospect videos. They're not. And therefore, you have to. No. But that's what I see when I look. It's not particularly smart, I grant you, but I've never promised I'm smart at all. I've promised the opposite, actually. And it's what I like to do. It's how I like to go about numbers. No, I don't know what it's called. I don't even know what it's called. Being a nerd, that's what I call it. Hopefully, a real nerd like Travis May can come in and explain how you actually use numbers, specifically in terms of teams, pretty soon. So I'm looking forward to, him owning me just fully. I can't wait. So yeah, look out for that wherever it's going to end up. I appreciate you checking out this video if you have. Feel free to check out Rondale Moore's or anyone else's stats in the database. Again, I still don't rack up clicks or payments. It's just because I want to talk to other people, and it's easier to talk to you about this stuff and anyone else if we can all look at the stuff, and that's literally why it's in the link. So yeah, let me know. Make sure you check out the sources tab if you do check out the database, because that's where the real heroes are giving us access to this stuff. It's all public, but drawing it into one place is just wizardry, and those people are the ones who are letting us do it. So yeah, make sure you give them a follow, and a thank you if you do. Really appreciate it, guys. Yeah, I'm done. I'm out. Can I go back to... I'm just going to go back to staring at the spreadsheet over here. Goodbye. Hope you're happy, healthy, safe, and keep grinding. That's so cheesy. It's just so cheesy.
Do you have the time to listen to me grind?